Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Doug Masterson, and I came at a great day because you're talking an awful lot about chemistry, which I'm a professor in the chemistry and biochemistry department, and actually I do a lot of stuff with amino acids and proteins and peptides, so you're learning about macromolecules that are actually near and dear to my heart. Lately, however, I don't do as much chemistry as I used to. I'm more associated with administration these days, and I'm currently the associate provost in the provost office dealing with institutional effectiveness kind of stuff. And that's kind of boring sounding. But one of my things that I'm really passionate about is student success, and have been involved with Ms. Littlejohn and a number of initiatives. And Dr. McKay, is she still in here? Yep, she's back there in the back. We've attended several conferences together over the last couple of years about things that we can do to help promote student success. And one of the things that I took from one of these conferences this past February, I think when we were in Vegas, right? We were in Vegas for Mardi Gras. That's right. Is this idea of stop studying and start learning. Stop studying and start learning. And I see some grins, and I see some other things, right? Is that something that you would typically think a professor should be telling you? To stop studying? Well, not really stop studying as we really think about it. But if you really think about it, when I was talking to students about studying, really what I was trying to convey to them is you need to learn the material. And I think students were really interpreting this to be something different. Okay? And so I think we're using different language, or we have different ideas in our head when we talk about studying and learning. And so I want to try to demystify a little bit of that. Okay? And so, really what I want you to do is stop studying probably as you're doing it now and get into what we call learning mode. Because learning lasts forever, right? Or pretty much so forever. Studying can be very temporary. Okay? I can study something really quickly and memorize it for a test and then forget it. But I can tell you all that the things that you're learning here in this class are going to be very, very important to you later on when you get into, this is pre-nursing students, right? When you get into that. And you know, the older I get, the more I hope you all are learning the stuff that you need to be learning. Because one of these days you'll probably be taking care of me at some point, okay? So it's very important that we get into learning mode, okay? So I want you to think real quickly. This is kind of a bigger group than I normally give this talk to, so I'm not going to ask anybody to give me examples. But think about, for just a moment, what words come to your mind when you think of the word study and then learning. Think for just a moment. When you think of studying, what kind of other words come to your mind? And when you think of learning, what kind of words come to your mind? They're probably not the same words. Some of them will be similar, but not all of them, right? So this was a list that I've come up with by talking to a variety of students and reading some books on this kind of material. So probably what you came up with when you were thinking about studying is reading, review. You got a review session this afternoon that you need to go to, right? That's kind of what you're thinking of as studying. You might think of the word research. You may think of some type of exercise, working your homework, right? And you probably are thinking about, I need to memorize that for the test, or I need to cram, right? Many of you are probably thinking, I've scheduled 2 hours before the exam to, right? And that's not a good idea, okay? But when you think of the word learning, you probably have a different set of words that come to your mind, okay? So for example, you might think of somebody who's learned a lot. They're probably wise. You think of wisdom. You think of training. You might think of research. You may think of something that you've attained or it's permanent. Understanding, right? And transferability. You're going to learn some things in this class that you're going to transfer to another class, and it's going to be so important. And the light bulb will go off. Oh, yeah, when Ms. Littlejohn talked about X, Y, and Z, I remember that now, right? Because you learned it. But you won't go into that class and you'll remember the things that you studied. You'll remember the things that you learned, right? And so this idea of studying and learning is not exactly the same thing. It's very important that you get out of this idea of studying and get into the idea of learning. Because if you get your mindset to where you're thinking about learning, you will know more, you will be able to do more, and you will be more successful. And everybody in here wants to be successful. You want to get a good grade in this class, you want to go to the next class, and you want to do well. At some point, you want to be a licensed nurse practitioner, whatever the case may be, right? That's your goal. And the only way to attain that goal is by getting yourself in learning mode, I promise you. So let's look at an example. Let's suppose that Ms. Littlejohn comes in next week and says to somebody in here that I want you to teach a class on a specific topic in Biology 107. Okay, so maybe she's going to be out of town and she's going to pick on one of you to teach that class. Are you going to study that material or are you going to learn it? You're going to learn it, right? And why would you learn it as opposed to just studying it? Because you're going to be up here doing what I'm doing right now, and you don't want to be embarrassed, right? Nobody wants to be embarrassed. Nobody wants to look foolish, right? So you're going to learn the material. You're going to spend a lot of time learning that material. You're going to spend the time that you need beforehand, right, to prepare the materials for class, a presentation, maybe a series of activities. You're going to try to satisfy her expectations of what that class should have. You're not going to just study that material 20 minutes before you come into class and present it. You're going to spend a substantial chunk of time committing to that material so that you know it when you get in here, so you can talk about it like you are an expert, because by the time you know it, you are the expert in it, right? You're not just going to study it, right? So I think we've covered that pretty well. You're going to learn, right? You're going to put yourself in learning mode and know what you need to know for that particular class, right? So now let me switch gears just a little bit and ask, if you are willing to commit that kind of time to come up here for 50 minutes, why don't you commit that kind of time for your exam that's coming up? Right? I think it's because a lot of students, myself included when I was a student, I thought that studying was enough. To me, when I first started off in college, studying was simply sitting down and reading the book. Reading is just one part of studying, right? I can read lots of words and not understand a thing that I've read. But I've studied it, but I haven't learned it. I don't have that understanding and that comprehension, right? So I don't need to see a show of hands, but just think about it. How many of you, pretty much so, devote your study time to reading the book? I would wager it's a good number of you. And most of us, that's how we got started, right? But especially in the STEM classes, right? Learning takes more than just reading. You actually have to work the problems. You have to struggle with problems. You have to make mistakes, and we're going to talk about that. And it's okay to make mistakes, because you're not learning anything if you don't make mistakes. The question is, when do you make the mistakes? You don't want to make them on exam day, right? And that's what we're going to try to avoid. Okay? Now, one of the things, and I'll be honest with you, I really didn't know chemistry until I came to southern Mississippi and had to teach it. And I got a PhD. I faked my way through a PhD and didn't really understand it until I got here and had to teach it. I didn't really fake my way through it. But I was so specific in my research as a graduate student, I was an expert in that area. Do you know how many times I've come in here and taught that to students, though? 0. The first time I had to give a lecture on organic chemistry, which is what I've got a PhD in, I was sitting there going through the book just like the students were, having to remember things that I had long forgotten, right? I had to relearn a lot of the material. Today, because I've been teaching it for so long, it's there. I can recall it at any time now because I taught it, because I teach it, okay? So how many of you, when you are quote-unquote studying, try to teach it to somebody else? We know that it's one of the best techniques in the world to learn the material, is to actually try to teach it. I've had situations where I think I understand the topic really well, and then I go and try to tell somebody about it, and I'm like a bumbling idiot. I really don't understand it. I have to step back and go, maybe I don't really get it, right? You really understand material, especially in science, if you can break it down into simple concepts and explain it to your grandma or your mom or your dad, somebody that's not associated with the class. If you can take somebody off the street and give them an understanding of what it is that you're trying to convey to them, you probably really understand that material. And yet most of us, when we sit down to study for an exam, never use that technique. We read the book. We might work a couple of homework problems if we're lucky, right? Then we come in and we try to work our way through the multiple choice test by guessing, right? And we do that, right? And there is an art to that, to the level. But it's not understanding. It's not the learning that we really want you to get out of this. So I want you to understand, if you really want to know, if you really want to do well, try to teach this material to somebody. Get in a group and try to teach the material to somebody. Break up the parts and try to teach it, okay? So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how we learn. And this is, I'm certainly not an expert in it. I'm learning more about how we learn all the time. I do not have a degree in psychology, but the longer that I'm in college or teaching at the university, I think I should have probably gotten a minor. Because it is important to know how we learn, right? And this is one of my favorite cartoons. This is the difference between teaching and learning, and they're not the same. So the little boy says, I taught Stripe how to whistle. The other boy says, I don't hear him whistling. And then the boy says again, I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. When your professor is up here talking to you and going over information, trying to help you, at the end of the lecture, they have done their job and taught. But have you done your job and learned? That's the other part of this bargain that we have, right? You can't learn this material, especially stuff in STEM. You can't learn it by osmosis, to use a scientific term. It doesn't immediately transfer from my brain into your brain. It takes a struggle, okay? And so I'm sure that boy sat there and whistled all day at Stripe, trying to teach him how to whistle. And at the end of the day, he did his teaching, but nonetheless, Stripe didn't learn it, okay? There are some different learning cycles that you can look at. This is one that comes from the same book. This is from the paper Learning to Learn. It's one of my favorite little papers on the topic. Dr. McKay has read it and I think used it in a variety of her classes that she teaches as well. So this is Kolb's learning cycle. Really, I don't want to go through all the details of this today. We don't have enough time. But if you look at what it really takes to learn, notice up there, nowhere do I see the word reading, right? I see things like reflective observation, thinking about what you see, abstract conceptualism, experimentation, being active with the material that you're learning, right? Grappling with it, and then concrete experience, feeling what it is that you're dealing with. You have to put this topic in context, okay? Every topic that you learn, you need to put in some type of context, okay? But what you won't find there in that learning cycle is reading, just reading the book or rewriting your notes. Those are important things to help you learn, okay? They can help you in terms of being active in concrete experience, but this is really what you need to be focusing on. So in terms of experiences, I'm kind of a big believer in experiences, and every time I've ever made a mistake in my life, I learned something. That's important, okay? It's important that you learn from the mistakes that you make, okay? And making mistakes is okay. Many of you feel like making a mistake is something bad, but that's because that's what society has taught you, and actually making mistakes is okay. That does not mean that Dr. Masters isn't encouraging you just to go out and make all kinds of mistakes. I'm not saying that, okay? But as long as you learn from a mistake that you make, it's an opportunity for learning. And take it as such, okay? Now the question is, when do you make your mistakes and your failures? I'd much rather make those mistakes and failures when I'm at home doing my learning as opposed to when I'm in class taking Ms. Littlejohn's exam. Make them when it's low stakes so that you don't have to make them when it's high stakes. Very, very important, okay? Failure is important. Everybody, think about the people who have really done well in life. And I mean really well. Like Walt Disney and other people that made it big. They had a lot of failures before they made it big. And they learned from those failures and they moved on. It's okay not to do well on an assignment as long as you learn from it and do better the next time. Use it as a learning opportunity. Don't look at it as an opportunity to bail on the class, okay? Look at it as an opportunity to learn, okay? Very important. Repeat performance. And I will ask for a show of hands. How many people in here have ever performed in a musical group of some sort or a sports team? Just about all of you, right? Good number of you. How many of you went to that game or that concert without having practiced? Very few, right? There's an old saying that you practice as you want to play, right? When my daughter was in band, she would practice her flute as if she was actually on the marching field, because that's where she had to play. She didn't play in her bedroom because she wasn't going to be in her bedroom when she was getting ready to perform, right? You practice like you want to play. So when you are studying or learning, you need to be doing things like you would be doing on the day that you're taking the test. Put yourself under some time constraints, right? I know people that say they knew the material, and then when they got to the exam with all the pressure, it all went out. That's because you didn't practice under pressure, right? Sure, when you have hours and hours to figure out a problem, but you're going to have 50 minutes. Well, this is a 50-minute class, yeah? You're going to have 50 minutes to answer 45 questions. If we just do the math, that's about 1 question per minute. Kind of math I like to do, right? How many of you put yourself under that kind of time constraint when you're doing your studying? Put yourself under that time constraint. You'll be a lot better for it, I promise. Make sure that you interact with others, and make sure that you reflect on what you're learning. Very, very important. There's many ways to reflect on it. Ask yourself why it is that you understand what you understand. Think about it. Think about your thinking. I know that sounds weird, but think about your thinking, and it will get better and it will improve. Interactions with others is very important, but I will add a little caveat. A lot of people will get into groups to study that are in the same boat. And it's because we feel comfort in being able to sit in the same boat, right? We know it's all happening to us at the same time. And you all can sit around and complain about the professor because they're just not fair, because you're all not doing well, or whatever the case may be, right? But you need to be in a group to where you can work on each other's strengths. Get in a study group where you understand a topic really well, and maybe another person understands a topic that you don't understand very well, they understand it well, and you can really synergistically work together. But we, as humans, we just have this natural gravity of, you're not doing well in the class, well, let's get together and let's try to study. Well, if nobody understands anything, it's going to be hard to be productive that way. So make sure that you pick your groups wisely, okay? This Bloom's taxonomy stuff I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on just because of the time that we're at now. But it's very important to know that there are multiple layers to knowledge and learning. Where do you think you want to be by the time you graduate from USM and are a nurse? You want to just be down here remembering? Or do you want to be up at the top, kind of towards the top, and being able to analyze and evaluate? And think about it. Being a nurse, you're going to see a lot of different patients come through. And is it really going to be that important that you remember every term that you learned in nursing school? I mean, it might be important. I'm not saying it's not. But is that going to help the patient? It's not going to be able to help the patient unless you can analyze the situation, evaluate, right? Medicine really is a scientific experiment. It really is. Doctors just don't use the same terms, right? If you really knew how doctors thought about curing your diseases, you'd probably kind of freak out a little bit. They get a license to practice medicine. You will get a license to practice nursing, okay? Practice. Think about that term. Practice, okay? You are doing experiments on people all the time. You are analyzing situations, you're evaluating, you are hypothesizing what it might be, and you are doing an experiment by, here, go take a Z-Pack. Come back and see me in 3 days if it doesn't get any better. That's an experiment. So all the things that you're learning in this class about science is going to be very relevant, whether or not you have to tell a patient something about a phosphodiester, right? But nonetheless, it's true. Okay, so we want you to be able to move up this as best we can. Right now, in this class, you're probably somewhere down in the bottom part. But as it goes on, and if you start learning more, you will be able to move up the pyramid. Okay? I always just throw Homer in there because I like Homer, but I'm not saying anybody in here is Homer. All right. Let's talk a little bit about metacognition. This is where a lot of this talk actually comes from, and this is really a pared-down version of this book that Dr. Sandra Yancey McGuire published called Teaching Students How to Learn. And I think it's very important, especially for us professors, to think about it in that way, because we come in and we're so excited about our content that we think you're just going to be able to learn it, but we need to spend a little bit of time trying to help you learn that material as well. And so very important that you think about these types of things. And these are the 10 things that she talks about in her book that I'm really just getting at the heart of here. The book is actually quite more detailed than this. But one of the things that you need to do to really put yourself in learning mode before you ever come to class is preview. You need to preview the material. One of the things that frustrates me as a professor is when I come in, I start talking about the material, and then I see a whole room full of students who are like, what is he talking about, right? I come in with the assumption that you're at least familiar with the material we're going to be covering today or yesterday or whenever it happened to be, right? You need to be prepared. You need to be prepared for active reading. Active reading is different than reading. It is not reading your Harry Potter book or whatever the latest topic is, right? You need to be able to paraphrase. You need to be able to use the textbook correctly. This is one of the things that really I have trouble understanding. I mean, I'll have students come to the tutorial center, and they'll say, I'm having trouble with X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, did you read that section in the textbook? And they'll pull the textbook out, and it cracks as it opens, right? It hasn't been opened. How much did you all spend for the textbook in this class? $100. In my class, it's $250 for the textbook. For some science classes, it's over $300. And you all go, oh, that's real expensive and that's unfair. It is very expensive, but it's even more not a value when you don't use it. If the book costs $10 and you never use it, you spent too much money. If the book costs $300 and you used it wisely, you used it correctly, and you got an A in the class, I'd say it's a good investment. Okay? So being able to use the textbook correctly. And a science textbook is not the same as an English literature textbook. It is not. There are figures, and there are examples worked out, and there are graphs, and you need to be able to identify and use those various pieces of information effectively. It's not start at the top of the page and read all the way down to the bottom and turn over to the next page. You have to actively read that book, okay? And there's ways in which you can develop to do that better, okay? You need to attend class and take notes by hand. Something about writing something makes things stick better. So much more than if you're sitting there typing or using your finger on an iPad. Believe me, it works, okay? Do your homework without using examples when assigned. Many people will wait till the night before the exam and they'll go, I'm going to study by doing all the homework. Too late. Night before the exam, you really should be reviewing and just trying to make sure everything is fresh, okay? Teach the material. This actually probably should be kind of towards the top. I would argue that if you can teach the material to your buddies, you probably have a better understanding of it than you would just doing anything else. Work in groups, and then her 10th suggestion is create your own exam. Does anybody in here ever created their own exam questions? A few of you. Good. It's a good idea when you're actively reading, when you come across a topic, think about, how might Ms. Littlejohn ask a question about that? And come up with some questions and answer them. It will get you a better level of understanding than just reading that topic all by itself, I promise. Okay? That doesn't mean you have to create all 45 questions. You don't have to create that level. But when you read something that you think, man, that's an important topic, come up with a couple of questions that you might think could be asked of that particular topic. Okay? Dr. McGuire gave a large lecture at this conference that we went to, and without doubt, just about every student that interacted with her and did these things was able to improve their grade from a DF range to a BC range without much difficulty. It's just a different set of ways in which we think about things. Okay? There is this thing called the study cycle in the book that I want to go over just a little bit. And again, when you see me use the word study, think learning. Okay? We call it the study cycle because that's how it was in the book, but it really is about learning. So again, preview the material before class. Very important that you at least have read through the material, you know what the topics are for the day. You have prepared your mind to be receptive to that material. Okay? If you come in cold, you will not remember it, I promise you. Okay? And now there's somebody out there that says, oh, it works well for me. Trust me, you get into some higher level STEM classes, it will not work anymore. Okay? That kind of stuff stops. Attend class. I can't say it enough. I did a rough calculation, not including fees, just tuition. You all are spending approximately 50 cents per minute to be in class. 50 cents a minute. How many of you have a job that makes 50 cents a minute? But yet students will pay 50 cents a minute for a class to go work at a job that they're not making 50 cents a minute to be at. I've had any number of students, I had to miss class because of work today, Dr. Masterson. And I had to work through college. I sympathize. I get it. I really do. But you're going to pay more money to miss a class than what you're going to make? Go back and talk to your employers and say, can we work something out? I understand you need me, but I'm paying a lot of money for this class, or somebody is, right? 50 cents a minute. That's not including your books. That's not including your fees. And we like to fee you to death, right? So you can add a little more to that 50 cents a minute. That's what you're paying to be in a class, okay? Make sure you review after class. Very, very important. Many of you may have a class just right after this and you can't immediately get to it, but that day you need to go through and review your notes. Do whatever it is that you do to help remember the things that you need to remember. And of course, that's going to lead to study, which learning mode again, right? And then you have to assess. This is where most people, students, stop, is right here. You need to assess your learning. It's very important. How would you assess your learning? Give me some examples. Because after I've read something, I think I understand it. Right? How would you assess it? How might you assess learning in this class after you've done some study and learning and things like that outside of class? How would you assess that? The easiest way is to work a couple homework problems, right? I'm assuming you assign homework problems. A few?
Charts to fill out. Most of it's not mandatory, okay. But being able to fill out one of those charts without looking at your notes, that would assess how much you actually know about
That's right.
Okay?
So there are many ways you can ask yourself some questions. I'm sure the book has some questions, right? You can answer those questions. Did you get the answer right or wrong, right? But a lot of students will stop here thinking, well, I've studied, I'm ready to go. You need to assess. You need to identify your strengths and your weaknesses. You need to reinforce your strengths and you need to improve your weaknesses, okay? And the only way to do that is to get into the cycle. You assess, you go back, you study a little bit more, and you get yourself better and better. It is a cycle. There is no doubt that it takes time. This is not a magic bullet. There are no magic bullets, and anybody who tells you there's a magic bullet is a liar. Okay? You won't hear me say that often. There's no magic bullet. It takes time. It takes effort. That's why 12 hours of college credit is considered full-time, because if you add up all the time afterwards, it should take you about 40 hours a week to do 12 hours of college credit. It's usually considered to be a 2-to-1 ratio, outside study to lecture time. And by my math, that gets you to 36 hours. That's a full load, right? That's a full-time anything for anybody, okay? Make sure you work problems to assess. I will spend just a moment or two talking about mindset. I don't know if any of you heard the term mindset before? Okay, good. You're going to learn it today. I'm a big believer in mindset. You can have a fixed mindset, or you can have a growth mindset. And the good thing is, biology does not determine which mindset you have when you're born. You can develop a mindset. Many people have a fixed mindset, thinking that, well, I didn't do well on that test, I must not be cut out to be a nurse. Nonsense. Each and every one of you in here could be a nurse. Depends on whether or not you've got the grit and determination to make it through, right? If you have a growth mindset, you're going to look at those failures as opportunities to learn something and grow and become better. And we can pick which mindset we are, and we have to work on it. I have to work on my mindset. I am in the business of failure, believe it or not. Most of the grant proposals that I write get rejected, and yet for some reason I still submit them, right? When I submit papers for publications, more times than not, the editor sends it back and wants corrections, right? But yet I go through the process and I learn from those mistakes and I make improvements and I move on, right? You can have a growth mindset or you can have a fixed mindset. And so look at challenges as things that help you grow. So when you're looking at problems that are tough in this class, don't look at it as something to avoid. Look at it as something to conquer. Okay? So it's very important that you get into a growth mindset. There is a good video on YouTube, if you'll just Google mindset. There's a great video on mindset out there that'll tell you more about it than I have time to talk about today. And so with that, I just will mention to you that we do have a Success website. If you have a need to go and find resources, you can find them there. I would make this your homepage on your laptop or your tablet. I've done that. I've recorded this lecture. I'm going to give it.